In 1795, Kamehameha the Great officially founded the Kingdom of Hawaii. Louis XVII died, a fire swept through Copenhagen, destroying almost 1,000 homes, and Daniel Mendoza, famed champion of England, found himself on the receiving end of one of the biggest ass-kickings of all time. When Benjamin Bryan, known as Big Ben, won the title from Tom Johnson, there were no real challengers to be found. He officially retired and the title was left vacant. Had it not been for Richard Humphreys, Mendoza would have likely claimed it sooner, but it took him until 1794 to be rightly acclaimed champion of all England. A lot has been written about Mendoza over the years, and some of it is even true. What we can say for certain is that there was something special about him as a fighter. He stood 5 feet 7 inches and weighed in at around 160 pounds. Bearing in mind no one had pre-fight training camps the way they're done today, and cutting weight was not a thing, he'd likely fit somewhere between welterweight and lightweight today. The men he fought and beat on a regular basis were natural heavyweights. Most people claim this as evidence that he created a new scientific method of boxing, and to a degree, that's true. He had to fight differently because he literally couldn't reach his opponents. But if you've been following the world's slowest series on him in my Stories of Greatness playlist, you'll know full well that Daniel Mendoza was as crazy as a sack of badgers. Yes, he was skilled at closing distance. Yes, his stance was unusual and catered directly to his own strengths. Yes, he was a great counterpuncher. But none of those things would have taken him to the heights he reached if it wasn't for the fact that he was more game than anyone else. He simply couldn't visualize the possibility of losing. And in the main, he was right. However, a number of the fancy, the rich and influential backers who essentially controlled the sport, did not like a small, arrogant Jew as champion, and so the search for a challenger was on. The problem was, there was no one with the credentials who was willing to fight. Until Mr. John Jackson. In reality, it was an odd choice. Jackson was the son of the builder who had made his fortune bridging the open sewer that used to be the River Fleet. Jackson had been spotted by Colonel Harvey Aston, a leading member of the fancy, and persuaded to try his hand at the pugilistic arts. He was tall, well-muscled, insanely strong, and seemingly supremely gifted at fighting. In his first fight, aged only 19 years old, he utterly destroyed the veteran challenger for the title, Thomas Futrell, and in doing so, cemented his place in the boxing world. In his next fight, he slipped and broke his ankle, causing him to lose. At that point, he decided he didn't wish to fight anymore. He was, however, well brought up, well-spoken and polite, and became a friend and companion to many of the gentry and nobility. When no one could be found to fight Daniel Mendoza, Jackson begrudgingly agreed. He hadn't fought for 6 years, and had a record of 1 win and 1 loss, but he had continued to spar, to teach, and was still in fine shape. But no one really expected him to win. A stage was erected in Hornchurch in Essex, now a suburban town on the outskirts of London, and despite the torrential rain, the flooding, and the almost impassable mud on the roads, a huge crowd gathered to watch. The odds all favoured Mendoza, as, despite his popularity with the leading members of the fancy, not much was known about Jackson by the public, and Dan the Jew was a genuine celebrity. Jackson arrived at the ring first, accompanied by the former champion Tom Johnson, who was to act as his second. The crowd raised a great cheer, but Johnson's name was shouted louder than Jackson's. The shouts had hardly died down when a huge cheer arose from the back of the crowd as Mendoza himself arrived. The seconds tossed a coin to see who had which corner, and Mendoza won. The sun had finally made its way through the clouds, and Jackson would be starting the fight with it right in his eyes. The fighters came up to scratch and shook hands. Jackson's hair had been cut short, and he towered over the champion. At the sight of the two of them together, the odds started to shift more to Jackson's favour. But Mendoza's self-belief never wavered. The fight began, and Mendoza immediately showed his nimbleness and speed. They both swung a few light blows, but nothing landed. But after 2 minutes, something changed. Mendoza was holding back, trusting in his speed to allow him to evade the first blow and counterpunch as he'd done so many times before. But he underestimated Jackson's speed and sheer power. His right hand flew out, and Mendoza threw his body backwards to evade it, but Jackson's reach was too much for him. The blow landed on Mendoza's throat, and though it had been robbed of much of its power, he staggered backwards all the same. Jackson stepped after him and launched a left lead with every inch of power he could generate. It landed clean, and Mendoza dropped to the floor, a large cut open on his cheek. First knockdown and first blood to Jackson. The second round started, and Mendoza had learned more caution. Jackson, however, was as unperturbed and relaxed as ever. That round, and the next, followed similar paths. The champion rose to the challenge and exchanged a number of blows with the challenger. They both landed a few, but neither could gain the ascendancy. However, Mendoza was working as hard as he ever had, and Jackson was simply coasting, gaining the measure of the man against him. In the fourth round, Jackson backed away. He let Mendoza come after him and simply soaked up the blows on his arms. Then, with no warning, he charged forwards, brushing off Mendoza's strikes, and with a visible smile on his face, he caught Dan with a number of powerful shots. As the champion backed away to try and clear some space, Jackson's right hand caught him clear across the face, opening another cut and dropping him yet again. It was the fifth round, however, that did the real damage. Jackson bundled Mendoza against the ropes, used his weight advantage to hold him there, and with one hand holding his hair, launched a series of punishing hooks and uppercuts to the face. Mendoza was utterly powerless to respond, and after a few moments, Jackson tossed the champion to the floor yet again. There was uproar in Mendoza's corner, and large numbers of his supporters cried foul, but after a brief consultation with the umpires, two well-respected members of the fancy, Mr. Smith and Mr. Naylor, it was agreed that there was nothing in Broughton's rules that prevented Jackson's tactics, and that Mendoza could have had his hair cut short, as Jackson had done. To his eternal credit, Mendoza made it back to scratch, and for 3 more rounds endured the punishment Jackson put his way. The fight was so one-sided that even his most loyal backers questioned whether Mendoza was deliberately taking a fall. But no one that knew him could believe that of him, and the simple truth of the matter was that Jackson was bigger, stronger, fitter, more skilled, and Mendoza simply couldn't match him. The 9th round was an exercise in futility. Jackson hit Mendoza at will, without suffering the slightest blow to land in return. When Mendoza crashed to the ground again, Jackson looked as fresh as he had when he'd first stepped into the ring. Mendoza, on the other hand, was done. In an era where fights routinely lasted more than an hour and consisted of hundreds of rounds, Jackson had taken a fraction over 10 minutes and only 9 rounds to strip the title from the great Daniel Mendoza. With his work done, Jackson once more retired from competitive fighting, preferring his position as the gentleman of the ring. He became a trainer of the gentry, opening rooms with the celebrated swordsmaster Henry Angelo. He ran many a charitable benefit event for fighters down on their luck and English prisoners of war in France. He also founded the Pugilistic Club, which was responsible for maintaining the standards of the sport and bringing it back to proper respectability. Even Mendoza quickly accepted that Jackson was the better man. I'll leave you with his own words on the matter. This is the only instance of my losing a battle where I did not afterwards defeat my antagonist, and my being vanquished on this occasion cannot surely be regarded as a circumstance reflecting disgrace on me, when it is considered that I had to contend with an antagonist who was not only far my superior in strength and size, but who has likewise always ranked as a first-rate pugilist, and is at this time looked upon by many as superior to any man of the present day.